So today I'm going to teach you how to make and use dialogues. So let's make a dialogue. So go into your operator tab in the creative menu, pull out a command block and then place it down. If you don't have that operators tab, it's options, controls, and right there. And then we're going to want a way to trigger the command block. I'll just use the pressure plate here. And inside of this command block, we're going to use the command dialog show, and then we'll just say @p. This is going to show it to the nearest player. And then we need to put in a dialogue. Now, the easiest way to do this is going to be using the website in the description. So head on over to that link. You should see something that looks a bit like this. And then first thing, we're going to go to the bottom right. There's a button here called inline. We're going to click this and it's going to make it more friendly for command blocks. When you want to save it as a file later, you'll click it again and it puts it in file form. So let's leave it inline for now though. And now we have a choice. What type of dialogue would you like to make? So I'll give you a quick rundown of what each type does. Confirmation lets the player select between two options like yes or no. Dialogue list lets you click through to other dialogues, but it's no good if you don't already have other dialogues. Multi-action is great if you want a lot of buttons that can do different types of actions. Notice is just a way for you to give the player information. And server links doesn't do anything unless you have a modded server sending information about what URLs to display, which we're not going to cover modded servers in this, just dialogues. So you can pick one of those options, and if I went too fast for you, there is an example data pack in the description that lets you see all of these in game. In my case, I'm going to pick confirmation because it's a good balance of difficulty for a tutorial. So you'll notice a bunch of options have popped up here, and don't worry, we don't have to set all of them. We'll just start with the important ones. So title is very important, and if you click the drop down, there's way too many options. We'll cover those other options in a moment, but for now, just pick string. I'm going to call mine How to Dialogue. And if we click outside this box, you'll notice over on the right side, the picture updates, and it kind of gives you a little preview, not a perfectly accurate preview, but pretty close to what it's going to look like in game. So our next option is our first optional one. We don't actually have to put in anything for external title, and that's because if not present, title will be used instead. So a lot of these underline options have defaults, and that's why we don't have to put anything there. There is one exception here. This underline one has a giant red exclamation mark to it, and that means it's required. But yeah, external title we don't have to do anything with, so we can skip and move on to body. So think of body like body paragraphs in an essay. So you can either have one paragraph or you can have multiple. In my case, I want multiple, so I'm going to pick list here. We're going to add a paragraph. And we're going to be able to pick the type. Now there's two types here, and let's work with the easy one first. So we'll pick plain message. And in the contents dropdown, you'll notice this is the same selection that we had up in title. And basically these are a lot of raw JSON options that you don't really need to know, other than a few don't work. So score doesn't work, selector doesn't work, block doesn't work, entity doesn't work, and storage doesn't work. All the rest of them do. But we're just going to be slowly going up in difficulty, so we'll start with text here. Now, text can just be the same as a string, just something you type out, but you get a lot more control over it. So we have all kinds of options. These are all optional except for the text box, and you can change things like color, for example. So we can set this to a pre-specified color, or you can set like a custom color, which is honestly crazy. There's fonts, shadow colors, bold, italic, like these are all like self-explanatory options. So you have a lot of control over what you show the player. And so let's keep going. Let's add another paragraph here. And this time we are going to be using item. And what's unique about this is it lets us actually display an item texture. So we can see there's like a little baked potato over here. Now the rest of these are optional. I'm going to set the description just to show you what it looks like. So we'll do a string here. And this is where I'm going to put the choice that I'm posing to the player. It's not showing here, but the description will actually show up to the right of the icon. So these are pretty self-explanatory. One thing about width and height is that actually defines the space around the item, not the actual item size itself. So just keep that in mind. So next we have inputs. We'll come back to that later. We have three optional options. The defaults are fine for those. And now we get into our actions. So let's go over here and open the yes up. So we have another label. We can do a basic string. We can do fancy text. You can translate the name of items into other languages. You can show keybinds no matter what the keybind the player has set. And you can have a list of those options as well. We're just going to go with a simple string. And so for the yes action, I'll just do yum as the label. You can see the text that you put here. And we can even see it in the preview. So you can give them extra information about what will happen if you click this button, if the label isn't enough. Width lets you change how wide the button is, but I like how these are proportioned, so I'm not going to change them. And then here's the big deal right here, action. So let's press the plus button. We once again have a choice between types of actions. And because it's the one you're probably going to use the most, I'll show you how to use run command. So we can enter a command in here. And in my case, I'm just going to give the player a baked potato, just one. And one thing that's worth noting is I do an @s here because the person clicking the button is the one running the command like they typed it in themselves. And that is going to be important later, but we're not going to worry about it right now. Instead, we're going to move on and make the no option. And if you're in like multi-action or dialogue list, you might actually need to open up a list of actions here, kind of like we had with the body paragraph. But then you notice everything's the same. Anyway, back to confirmation. So for no same business, we just put on a label on the button. We can set a little extra hover info. And then we would add an action. Except for in this case, we don't want it to do anything. If they say, ew, I don't want a baked potato, we want it to just exit out of the dialogue, which it does automatically. So we can actually just remove this action, and it's basically an empty button with a label. Most of your buttons aren't going to be empty. I just wanted to show you that you can do it. It is an option. So we made a simple dialogue. How do we get it in game? Well, we go down here to the copy button. We go into Minecraft and we paste it in. And now when we step on this button, we get our dialogue in the game. And you can see it's running the command that gives us a baked potato. A word of warning about dialogues on repeat. It is actually possible to soft lock the player so they can't escape the dialogue. And that's actually why this warning is here. You may need to use it. You can actually save and quit and get out of the dialogue that way. And it's even worse on multiplayer because the dialogues don't pause the game. So you can't even hardly exit out of it at all. So our simple little dialogue is pretty cool. But what if you wanted to give the player that you're showing this to even more control? What if you wanted to choose how many baked potatoes you were giving to them? Well, if you head back to MySode's dialogue generator, I'll show you how. And don't worry if you accidentally, close the window. You can actually paste your dialogue over here and click outside the box and boom, everything's back. So let's scroll down here until we get to inputs. I said we'd be back, and here we are. So we'll press the plus button and we go to type. So once again, we have a choice, and once again, the examples are in the example data pack. But basically, a Boolean is an on-off, like a checkbox. Number range is a slider where you can pick a very specific number. Single option is a single button that you can click through to cycle between different options. And text is just a text box you can type right into. So the one that makes the most sense for my dialogue here is number range. So key is the most important option out of all these, but we're going to do that last. So let's move on to the other stuff. We have some optional things, and then we have some red exclamation marks. We'll fix the red exclamation marks first. And you can always hover over to see what it actually does. Label displayed on the slider, so this will tell them more info about what they're choosing. In the case of a number range, we have to pick the starting point and the ending point of the slider. So 0 doesn't make sense. We'll start at 1 and we'll go to, say, max stack size, 64. And in the case of the number range, you'll notice that there's a decimal number, which doesn't make sense. Half a potato, you can't get half a potato. So we're going to set the optional option here to be 1. So it's going to step every 1 instead of every 0.1. And then the initial we will set to 1. So that will make the sliders start way over here, and then you can pull it up depending on how many potatoes you want. Now, if you're paying attention, you probably are asking the question, how is this going to change how many potatoes they get? This is all visual. Well, that's what the key is for. So we are going to set a variable, and we're going to make sure this variable doesn't use capital letters or spaces. We're going to use underscores instead. So I'm going to call it potato num. That describes what we're saving, the information we're saving. So when the player selects how many potatoes they want, that information actually gets stored in this variable. And then we can retrieve that information down here in the action. We're under the yes in this case. So we're going to change run command to dynamic run command. So this allows us to use macros. So the way this works is we just do a regular command, give it s baked potato, and then wherever we want to insert that variable, we're going to replace that. So we're going to remove the 1. We're going to put a $, open parentheses, the name of our variable, and then close parentheses. And then here we have our macro variable. So it's going to actually insert whatever number they pick into the command. So let's copy it and try it out. So in our command block, we're going to go to the start here, hold shift, press end, that'll highlight everything, and then you can paste in your updated dialog. And so we have 2 baked potatoes. So if we go here, do you want a baked potato? How many potatoes? 20 exactly. I want a baked potato. And look at that. There is our variable right there. We get 20 baked potatoes, so we have 22 total now. So hopefully this is kind of blowing your mind right now. You can get crazy detailed player inputs, very precise things, and then put them in various commands. There's only one problem. It's this pop-up. You might have noticed that this pop-up keeps happening, and it's kind of annoying. Let's pay attention to this part of the warning, elevated permissions. Remember how I said the command is running as if I typed it into the chat? Well, not only does it have to check that I want to run this command, that it's not a command that will negatively affect your game, it has to check if I have elevated permissions. That means if you show a dialogue to a player in survival, they can't run this command. Big problem. So are there any commands that a survival player without cheats can run? Why, yes, there is. /trigger. So let's set up a trigger objective and integrate it into our dialogue. These commands are in the description, so you can copy and paste them, but we're going to do scoreboard objectives. We're going to add an objective. I'm going to call mine get potato because that's what it's doing. The criteria is going to be trigger. That's very important. And triggers generally don't need display names, so we'll just press enter. Now players can't use /trigger whenever they want. So we're going to add another command block in front of our dialog one. We're going to change the dialog one to be a chain command block always active. And that's because we first need to enable the trigger. So generally I like to enable right before I show the dialog so that it's part of the same system. But now we have to integrate /trigger into our dialog. So head back to the dialog generator, scroll down to the dynamic run command section, and we're going to change this command to be trigger. Then we put the scoreboard objective, then we put set, and then we're going to put our variable. Now an important point about variables in triggers, because triggers are scoreboards, they only work with numbers. So if you have an input that is the text type, it's only going to work if they put in a number. If you're using Boolean, the on true and on false values have to be numbers. And if you're in single option, inside options, the ID is going to have to be a number. So we're going to add one more thing for trigger. So look for either the exit action, or if you're using confirmation, the no section. And in the action, we're going to do run command because we're not getting any variables. And we're going to do trigger, our objective name. And then you can either do add or set 0. And this basically just disables the trigger so that they can't run it themselves afterwards. And by setting the exit action, that ensures that even if they use escape to back out of this menu, it will run this command, because no also doubles as the exit action. So go ahead and copy your dialog once again, and then we're going to paste it into our chain command block, like so. And I'm going to put that objective up on the sidebar just so we can see it. But now when we run this, say we pick 20 again, you can see our trigger gets set to 20. So we need to be able to pull that data and actually do something with it. And then we're going to add 2 more command blocks. You can see /trigger increases the complexity a bit. So the first one is the check. We're going to do execute as @player scores equals. This is in the description if you need it. Put your objective name. And then we're going to check if the player has at least a score of 1. If you want to check for 0, you can also put a 0 here. And then we can run a command as them. And this will just be the command we put in the dialog before. Now, because this isn't a macro, we can't just insert that 20. So in my case, I have to do it one by one. You could actually make this a function macro and have it insert the number. This part has a lot of different ways to do it, but the basic components are check the score, run the command, and then clear or reduce the score. So this is the simple version. So let's set this second command block to be chain, always active, and then the first one we're going to do repeat. And we'll also set this to be always active. And now I get 20 baked potatoes. And let's run this dialog again. Let's say I want 3 more to hit the 64 stack limit. There we go. And then let's make sure that the exit action is working. So it's enabled our trigger. We press escape. We type /trigger. We'll say I'm trying to cheat and get 100 potatoes. And you can see, actually you can see even on the chat right here that it set the value to 0, disabling the trigger so that we can't use it outside of the dialog. Very good, very good. So I'm going to show you one more advanced and optional technique here. Imagine that you wanted to change the information. Say you wanted to personalize it, have it say the player's name, but you don't want to rewrite an entire dialogue. Well, there is a way to do that. So press Ctrl-A, Ctrl-C inside of your dialog command, and then we'll need a data pack. So you can either use the example data pack or you can make your own. And then we're going to need a function file inside of this data pack. In the example data pack, you can just rename this file. I'm going to call it macro dialog, and you may begin to see where this is going. So open that MC function file up, and then at the bottom of this function file, type in $, and then paste in your dialog command. So this $sign at the beginning indicates that this is a macro command, which means we can put in macro variables. But before we do that, we need to adjust the action variables that the dialog uses. So delete the $sign, and we're going to type \U0024. That's Unicode for $sign. And the reason we're doing that is so that the function doesn't recognize this as a macro, but then the dialog will. So once you've filled that in for all your action variables, then we can start adding stuff. So for example, maybe I want there to be a name here. Do you name want a baked potato? We could have a macro for color, and maybe one for the max amount of potatoes we can select. Now remember how I said triggers need to be enabled to use them? Well, I like to put the enable command right next to the dialog command. So we'll enable the player, and we can either do @P or @S, both work, and then we put in the objective. Now we save this, and back in Minecraft, we can call that function. You can see it pops up right there using our variables. So let's say the player name is me. The color will be orange, and the max num will be 100. And now if we run it, oh, look at that. It uses my name. It changes the colors. It goes all the way up to 100 now. So we could get 100 potatoes, and you can see it did respect that. And we could run the function again, maybe only the max number of 10, put in some red, put in a funny thing for name, and then run it. We got red text, I'm talking to you, want a baked potato? And it maxes out at 10. So we can change those numbers, and obviously we're hard coding them, but don't worry. If you use with, you can get that data out of blocks, entities, storage. Storage is probably the most usable. And it works exactly like if we typed it all in. So now it's time to save all your hard work. We're going to go to the bottom right. We're going to click the inline button so that it's formatted properly. And then we're going to click this download button. Copy the drafts.json file, and we're going to put it in the dialog folder here. So just paste it next to all these example dialogues and rename it to something that makes sense. And then a little bonus tip, go back up to the data folder, go into Minecraft, tags, dialog, open both of these files, and we're going to add the dialog you just saved to this list. So it goes namespace, dialog name. And then once again, namespace, which for the example data pack is how to dialog, and then dialog name. Now, whenever you change a dialog file, you need to actually back out to the main menu and reopen the world. And now, if you press escape you'll see custom options here. You click this. Oh, we have our custom dialog. Do note this is the default version, not the function macro version. And you can also press G to bring up quick actions, which will also have your newly saved dialog. So there you go. That is how you make dialogs. A great way to get user input on a variety of things with a lot of little tricks and loopholes, like the function macros, that you now know how to do. So that is going to be it for this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something. And don't forget to leave your questions in the comments. But that's going to be it for me. So I'll catch you next time. Later.